missile, it wouldn't solve the problem. It will maybe fuel more problems to the American and to the whole international community.
The USS Enterprise is sailing to join another carrier group in the Gulf, projecting American power into the heart of the Middle East. But political leaders must now decide whether using that power makes further attacks more or less likely in the future. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
This is BBC News. Now a summary of the main news. The United States of America has been hit by a wave of terrorist attacks, the worst the world has seen. 2 hijacked planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York early on Tuesday morning, causing both buildings to collapse. A 3rd plane then struck the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., the heart of American military intelligence. A 4th plane, also believed to be hijacked, crashed in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Thousands of people are feared dead. All air traffic into and out of America has been suspended, and borders with Canada and Mexico closed. President Bush has vowed to hunt down and punish those responsible.
Well, the latest word from New York City is that the police commissioner there is saying that there are people alive in nearby buildings downtown, but not in the trade center itself. So 2 different versions of what's going on there. But the city's mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, has held a news conference within the past few minutes, and he advised New Yorkers to stay away from the city center, if at all possible.
If you have to come to work, and you work north of 14th Street, then you can come to work if it's critical. So if it's important and it's critical, then you come to work. But if you can stay home tomorrow, you're going to make things easier on yourself and easier on the city if you stay home. So the city is not officially closed. Manhattan is not officially closed north of 14th Street. But we're advising people if you can stay home, it would be better. Outside of Manhattan, you go to work and do all the things you would normally do. There's no particular reason to be constricted in activities there. But if you can stay out of the city, that would be good.
Rescue workers overwhelmed by their task. For New York, this was a nightmare come true. The scale of the carnage remains unclear, but it's possible that many thousands of people may have been killed. It's still too dangerous for the authorities to search the rubble that was the World Trade Center. The National Guard has been sent in to relieve exhausted firemen. The hospitals are overwhelmed.
All right, well then let's go north then.
For a while, the city's mayor Giuliani was himself trapped in the emergency control center, which was close to the towers. Later, he said the city's hospitals had been coping with more than 2,000 injured, but it's clear there's much more bad news to come.
Good afternoon. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately, and I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
As survivors walked around dazed, no one could be sure how many did not escape before the towers collapsed. Some estimate as many as 20,000 could still have been inside. Across America tonight, families will be coming to terms with untold grief. Within a couple of hours of the attack, volunteers were queuing to give blood at this Red Cross centre after the city's hospitals reported a critical shortage. Red Cross shelters are also being set up, offering support to the injured and bereaved. In Washington, rescue workers tended to hundreds of defense staff. After the Boeing 757 had crashed into the Pentagon, there was an orderly evacuation from the rest of the building. But nearly 5 hours later, the flames were still too intense to allow rescue in some affected areas. Again, the death toll is uncertain.
I don't have any sense of scale at all. We know there are casualties. I can't give you a good number, and we're going to work to try to get that as quickly as I can, but we don't have it yet.
America is in shock. As well as the casualties on the ground, 266 died on board the 4 aircraft. But everyone knows that that is just the start. The full horror of what's been done to this resilient nation will take time to sink in. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
Worldwide condemnation of the attacks has been swift, and so too have been the denials of guilt. Those responsible will have had money and resources available to only a few terrorist organizations. And the focus of the investigation into America's worst breach of security will inevitably fall on Islamic and extremist groups. As George Eakin reports, it will be those responsible for previous attacks on US interests around the world who will come under closest scrutiny.
To some, the horror and carnage inflicted on the United States today is a cause of celebration. This was the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, where many showed their approval of a day of unprecedented terror in America's backyard. A claim of responsibility was reported from one Palestinian group, but then swiftly denied. The Palestinian leader condemned the attacks.
We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Investigators hunting the organisers will first consider these were airborne suicide missions on a scale not seen since the Second World War.
I think it's almost impossible to believe that a hijacker could convince an American domestic airline pilot to commit suicide by flying into the World Trade Center. I have absolutely no doubt at all they had trained pilots. We know in the past that they've had pilots who have been perfectly capable of flying aircraft, and this can only be the only, I think, answer to this. American pilots would not do this, but Arab fundamentalists may well be prepared to.
And it's this wealthy Arab fundamentalist that American officials are already naming as an immediate suspect, Osama bin Laden. He controls and finances Al-Qaeda, an umbrella network of Islamic militants, and he's vowed to destroy the United States. Bin Laden is accused of masterminding a string of attacks, including the US embassy bombings in East Africa 3 years ago, which killed more than 200 people. In retaliation, the Americans fired cruise missiles at training camps used by bin Laden in Afghanistan. They put a $5 million price on his head and led a worldwide crackdown on Al-Qaeda. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban, which continues to offer bin Laden sanctuary, insists he isn't capable of carrying out attacks like today's. But bin Laden is suspected of involvement in the last attack on the World Trade Center 8 years ago. 6 people died when a bomb exploded in an underground car park. His associate, Ramzi Youssef, was jailed for that and for plotting to blow up a dozen American airliners over the Pacific, a plan which in some respects foreshadowed today's terror. While the possibility isn't being excluded, no one's suggesting that the devastation of such high-profile international targets like the Pentagon and the World Trade Center is domestic terrorism. The sophistication of today's attacks with highly trained perpetrators and their synchronization to occur within 2 hours point towards months, if not years, of preparation. Does all this mean, then, that a rogue state might be involved? Some experts are skeptical.
Countries have realized that as governments, their involvement in terrorism has cost them more than it's gained them. And so there are very few countries left who are in the real terrorism business. Obviously, some governments fund groups that may conduct terrorist acts, but that's very different than actually providing government support for it.
State condolences flood in, yet it seems highly unlikely, if not impossible, that the biggest and bloodiest terrorist operation ever could have been planned and prepared without a single government around the world even noticing. George Eakin, BBC News.
Well, the White House says the hunt for those responsible is already underway. The U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft said his department's full resources will be put into the investigation.
The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Ligat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ice.gov. ifccfbi.gov.
Evidence from people who died on the hijacked aircraft is being compiled by the FBI as it begins the investigation into the attacks. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, who you saw there a moment ago, says one passenger on the plane which crashed into the Pentagon rang her husband twice on her mobile phone. She's reported to have said that hijackers armed with knives took over the controls. The FBI has been handed a recording of a conversation between emergency service controllers and a passenger who reported a hijacking on board a fourth airliner which crashed in Pennsylvania. The controllers lost contact with the man shortly after he reported an explosion and the cabin filling with smoke. Sometime later, eyewitnesses on the ground saw the airliner flying low, upside down, and with its undercarriage retracted before it crashed into a wooded field. An American senator says the FBI is also examining tapes of conversations allegedly between the hijackers and their controllers. Well, the attacks in the United States have brought condemnation, of course, from around the world.
Americans are still coming to terms with the scale of today's onslaught. These are shocking events that no one in New York's financial district will forget. As America's cities burned, President Bush pledged to find those responsible.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The world was transfixed as television showed stunned people escaping from streets filled with dust and smoke. In Britain, domestic events were put on hold. Tony Blair called on all democracies to stand together to fight fanaticism.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world. The people who perpetrate it have no regard whatever for the sanctity or value of human life. And we, the democracies of the world, must come together to defeat it and eradicate it.
As the day developed and the full horror emerged, statesmen from around the world expressed their condolences. The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was one of the first to send his sympathies to the American people.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Speaking to the BBC's Hard Talk programme, Ehud Barak, Israel's former Prime Minister, also condemned today's events.
We are facing a growing wave of terror. Our hearts and souls are now with the American people and its leadership, and the devastating, painful kind of consequences.
The knock-on effects are enormous. In the short term, air travel to and from the United States is in disarray. At Gatwick, passengers were told flights were being recalled or cancelled. At American embassies around the world, people have been laying flowers and leaving messages. Tonight, Americans at home and abroad have been warned to stay alert. Helen Callahan, BBC News.
Well, the events have been described as America's second Pearl Harbor. Such was the disbelief and horror at the terrorist attack. Let's take a look now at some of the images and reactions of eyewitnesses.
Let's just get back. Get back.
What is it? They just think there's going to be another explosion.
I try to save people. In a moment, we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow. This is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
A big explosion happened. Some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.